The moment hung heavy in the cabin, that uncomfortable silence when everyone knows something is wrong, but no one dares to speak up. The elderly woman smoothed the edge of her blanket and looked out the window. Her eyes, deep and calm, had seen more than most could imagine, and she wasn't about to let a stranger's arrogance shake her peace. She had been through worse. Much worse. The flight attendant, still glancing back from time to time, whispered to a colleague near the galley. "Check again. Maybe there's a mix-up," she said. The other attendant scanned the passenger list. "No mistake," she murmured. "Dr. Evelyn Carter, Seat 2A, paid in full." Dr. Evelyn Carter. The name didn't mean much to the flight attendant, but if she had ever picked up a newspaper or turned on the evening news in the last decade, she would have recognized it instantly. Evelyn Carter wasn't just any elderly woman on her way to a conference. She was a retired aerospace engineer, one of the first black women in NASA's history to lead a design team. Her equations had helped guide satellites and spacecraft millions of miles from Earth. And now, she was quietly on her way to Washington, D.C., to receive the Lifetime Achievement Award in Science and Technology. But in that moment, none of that mattered. To the people around her, she was just an old lady in the wrong seat. As the plane began to taxi, Evelyn closed her eyes. A faint smile crossed her face. She wasn't angry. She was sad. Sad that even after all her years of breaking barriers, the world still judged her by appearances. Half an hour into the flight, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special passenger with us today. Dr. Evelyn Carter, one of the pioneers of our nation's space program, is aboard this flight. On behalf of the entire crew, we thank you for your service to science and humanity." The cabin erupted in murmurs. Heads turned towards Seat 2A. The man in the suit lowered his eyes in shame. The flight attendant's face drained of color. Evelyn opened her eyes, startled by the announcement. The captain himself stepped out of the cockpit, smiling warmly. "Dr. Carter," he said, extending his hand, "it's an honor to have you aboard. I studied your orbital trajectory model in training." The attendant stood frozen beside him, suddenly aware of every word she'd said earlier. Evelyn shook the captain's hand gently and replied, "Thank you, son. I'm proud to see you flying so high." Then, turning to the attendant, she added softly, "Never assume the value of someone's ticket by the way they look. Sometimes the people who change the world prefer to travel quietly." The attendant's eyes filled with tears. She nodded wordlessly, whispering, "I'm so sorry, Dr. Carter." Evelyn just smiled kindly. "It's all right, dear. We all have something to learn, even at 35,000 feet. Ava's fingers moved quickly over her phone screen, her face calm, but her mind blazing. She wasn't the kind to create scenes. She believed in quiet power, the kind that spoke through action, not anger. The flight attendant, oblivious, moved on to the next row with a practiced smile, pouring glasses of champagne for the other first-class passengers. Laughter filled the air, the kind that stung, because it pretended not to notice. Ava could see the subtle glances, the way people looked at her grandmother, then looked away, uncomfortable but complicit. She took a slow breath. Not today, she thought. Her grandmother, Evelyn, adjusted her blanket again and turned to gaze out the window, her reflection framed against the clouds. She had always been dignity in motion, calm, patient, graceful. But Ava knew what that calm cost. Ava leaned closer. "You shouldn't have to put up with that, Grandma." Evelyn's smile was small and weary. "Ava, baby, sometimes silence speaks louder than shouting." Ava shook her head slightly. "Maybe, but sometimes silence just lets them think they're right." She opened her messages and began typing. Not a rant, not a complaint, but a simple post with facts and photos. "My grandmother, Dr. Evelyn Daniels, retired NASA aerospace engineer and Lifetime Achievement Award recipient, was just treated like she didn't belong in first class. The flight attendant refused her service, assumed she was in the wrong seat, and offered her a snack box from economy. She's too kind to say anything, but I'm not. This is 2025. Do better." She attached a picture, her grandmother's calm, dignified face against the window, and hit post. The plane continued smoothly through the sky, unaware of the storm brewing online. Within minutes, Ava's phone began to buzz. First one notification, then 10, then 100. Friends, journalists, and former colleagues of her grandmother began resharing her post. By the time the plane started its descent into New York, the story had gone viral. Hashtag Dr. Evelyn Daniels was trending. A few rows ahead, a man whispered, "Wait, is that the Dr. Daniels? The NASA engineer?" He quickly searched her name on his phone, and his face went pale. "Oh my God," he muttered. "She helped design the solar navigation module back in the 80s. The whispers spread fast. Passengers began to realize who the quiet woman into a really was. The flight attendant returned, this time with a tray of freshly prepared meals and a nervous smile. "Dr. Daniels, Ms. Daniels, I wanted to apologize. We found some of the regular entrees after all." Evelyn looked at her kindly. "Thank you, dear, but we're fine." Ava glanced up from her phone and said softly, "You might want to check your notifications." The attendant blinked, confused, but her face changed when she glanced at her smartwatch. Her expression fell. An hour later, when they landed, a representative from the airline's executive office was already waiting at the gate, holding flowers. Ava smiled faintly. "Guess Jonathan Blake got my message after all." Evelyn chuckled, slipping her arm through her granddaughter's. "I told you he was a nice young man." As they walked down the jet bridge, passengers stood and clapped quietly, not just for a woman who had conquered space, but for one who had once again risen above ignorance with grace. Ava could barely process what was happening. Her post, a few honest words and a minute of video, had become a movement overnight. The clip showed just enough. The condescending tone, the dismissive glance, the difference in how her grandmother had been treated compared to others. It was simple, undeniable, and painfully clear. By sunrise, every major news outlet had picked it up. Reporters were tagging the airline nonstop. Thousands of people were sharing similar experiences. Older passengers, minorities, professionals, all recounting moments when they'd been judged before being seen. The comments poured in like waves of fire and empathy combined. Amid all the chaos, Ava kept her focus on her grandmother. Evelyn sat in her living room, sipping tea calmly, the morning light glowing softly against her silver hair. She seemed unfazed by the attention, almost amused. "I suppose this internet thing really is powerful," she said with a small smile. Ava laughed gently. "Grandma, you're trending in 5 countries. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Trending? Is that a good thing?" "Very good," Ava replied. "People are calling you an icon of grace." Just then, Ava's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID, Jonathan Blake, CEO of Skylux Airlines. Her heart skipped. "Miss Daniels," came a deep, steady voice when she answered. "I just saw your post. Is your grandmother Evelyn Daniels?" "Yes, sir," Ava said cautiously. There was a pause. Then he exhaled. "I can't believe this. She was my mentor 25 years ago, back when I was just a management intern at West Air before the merger. She taught me more about leadership in 6 months than any business school ever did." Ava blinked, surprised. "You knew her?" "Knew her." Jonathan's voice softened. "I owe her my career. When I made my first big mistake, your grandmother defended me in front of the board. She told them, 'Everyone deserves a chance to learn.' I never forgot that." He took another breath. "Please tell her I'll be there personally to apologize. Not a press statement, not a PR stunt. A real apology." Ava looked at her grandmother, who was now watching her quietly, as if she already knew what was being said. "She's right here," Ava said. "Would you like to speak with her?" There was a long silence. Then a warm chuckle came through the phone. "Dr. Daniels, it's Jonathan Blake." Evelyn smiled. "Jonathan, dear, I thought you'd be running the world by now." "I'm trying, ma'am," he said, voice trembling slightly. "But I failed you yesterday. One of my employees failed you. And that's on me." Evelyn replied softly. "Jonathan, what matters most is that you're willing to make it right." He promised to visit that afternoon. And true to his word, just before sunset, a sleek black car pulled up outside their home. Cameras flashed from a distance, but inside the gate, there were no lights, no microphones, just Jonathan kneeling beside Evelyn's chair, taking her hand, saying simply, Thank you for teaching me what leadership really means. Respect. Evelyn smiled, eyes glistening. Then, Jonathan, I'd say the lesson finally took flight. 2 days later, the morning air outside Skylux Airlines headquarters buzzed with anticipation. News vans lined the street. Microphones pointed toward the glass doors, and reporters murmured excitedly as the black sedan rolled to a stop. Out stepped Ava, poised and confident, followed by her grandmother, Evelyn Daniels, the woman the world had come to know as the first-class lady. Dressed in her signature navy coat and pearl brooch, Evelyn carried herself with the same quiet grace that had captured millions of hearts online. Cameras flashed like lightning, but she walked forward calmly, her hand resting lightly on Ava's arm. Inside the gleaming lobby, Jonathan Blake, tall, silver-haired, and visibly emotional, waited near the reception desk. As soon as he saw them, he stepped forward, no hesitation, no pretense. "Mrs. Daniels," he said, voice steady but thick with emotion, "I'm so deeply sorry." He took her hands in his eyes filled with regret. "You taught me integrity when I was just an intern. You taught me that leadership isn't about titles, it's about respect. And I failed you by allowing a culture where this kind of disrespect could happen." The room went quiet. Cameras recorded every word, but Evelyn seemed to forget the crowd. She smiled gently, her tone warm but wise. "You didn't fail me, Jonathan. People make mistakes. It's how you fix them that matters." Jonathan nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I intend to do." He motioned toward a presentation screen where a new logo appeared, a pair of open hands forming wings, with the words, "The Evelyn Daniels Dignity Program." Ava blinked in disbelief. "What's this?" Jonathan turned to her. "Your grandmother's story reminded us of what true respect means. Not just for passengers, but for everyone. We're creating a new global training initiative for all Skylux employees, from the ground crew to executives. Every staff member will learn cultural awareness, empathy, and inclusive leadership. And we're naming it after her." Ava's jaw dropped. "You're serious?" "Completely," Jonathan said firmly. "Every flight attendant, every manager, worldwide. Because change shouldn't be temporary. It should take flight." The room erupted in applause. Reporters typed furiously, cameras zoomed in, and social media lit up once again. But this time, with hope instead of outrage. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "Jonathan," she said softly, "I never wanted revenge. I just wanted people to see others as equals, no matter their age, color, or clothes." Jonathan smiled. "And that's exactly what this program will do. You've turned a painful moment into a lesson that will outlast all of us." He handed her a framed certificate in honor of Dr. Evelyn Daniels for reminding the world that dignity has no class. As the cameras clicked, Ava squeezed her grandmother's hand. "You did it, Grandma," she whispered. "You changed an airline." Evelyn smiled, eyes glimmering. "No, dear." We reminded them how to fly, with respect. And as they walked out into the sunlight, the world applauded not just a hero, but a legacy reborn. 3 months later, a quiet revolution took flight. The Evelyn Daniels Dignity Program, once a viral story born from humiliation, had become a global standard in airline culture. Every major Skylux terminal now displayed bold, silver posters with the slogan, "Respect has no class," inspired by Evelyn Daniels. Airports across the country shimmered with that message. From New York to London, passengers paused to read it, many recognizing the elegant face beside the quote, a smiling Evelyn Daniels, the woman whose grace had changed everything. At Skylux headquarters, banners hung proudly as hundreds gathered for the official launch ceremony. Flight attendants in crisp uniforms filled the auditorium. Journalists stood along the aisles, and executives took their seats in the front row. The energy was different this time. Hopeful, humble, and deeply human. Ava Daniels stood on the stage, her voice steady though her heart pounded. The room went silent as she began. "My grandmother built her company from nothing," Ava said, her gaze sweeping across the audience. "She broke barriers, led thousands, and inspired generations. But on one flight, a single, ordinary flight, she was treated as if she was invisible. She paused, letting the words sink in. Her story isn't rare, she continued softly. But it should be. And that's why we're here, to make sure it never happens again. The audience erupted into applause. Not polite clapping, but a genuine, emotional ovation that filled the entire hall. Some attendants wiped their eyes. Others stood, clapping harder, inspired by the honesty of Ava's words and the courage of the woman sitting in the front row. Evelyn Daniels, now 80 but still radiant in her navy coat and pearls, smiled proudly through tears. The once quiet passenger who had been dismissed and doubted was now the face of change. Jonathan Blake took the stage next, his voice breaking slightly. "We can't rewrite the past," he said, "but we can redefine the future. From today forward, every Skylux employee, from our pilots to our ticketing staff, will be trained to see dignity in every human being who walks through our doors." The crowd stood again, the applause thunderous. Later that evening, as the event concluded, Ava and Evelyn made their way to the airport for their flight home. The buzz of recognition followed them. Passengers nodded respectfully. Attendants smiled warmly. Before they could even settle in their seats, the cockpit door opened and the captain stepped out. He walked down the aisle with a bright, genuine smile. "Mrs. Daniels," he said, stopping beside her, "it's an honor to have you on board. Welcome to first class. This time, there are no stairs, no whispers, no esmirks, only kindness and quiet respect." As the plane ascended above the clouds, Evelyn looked out the window, her reflection shimmering against the sky. She turned to Ava and said softly, "You see, sweetheart, dignity doesn't need power. It just needs courage." And high above the earth, surrounded by people who had finally learned her lesson, she smiled, knowing that her story had given flight to something far greater than herself.